This is Chapter 15, Part 1, Money, Interest Rates, and Exchange Rates. There's 5 major topics to be covered in Chapter 15, and I'm splitting this up into 3 different lectures. So this first lecture for Chapter 15 will be a review of the money market and interest rate determination. First, let's think about what influences aggregate demand for money. When we talk about money in this case, we're talking about cash or currency or checkable deposits, which we generally classify as M1 money. So the first thing that influences our demand for cash is interest rates. Money pays little or no interest, so the interest rate is the opportunity cost of holding money instead of other assets like bonds, which have higher expected returns or interest rates. So the higher the interest rate, and this means that there's a higher opportunity cost of holding money, which will lower money demand. Second, prices in the economy. The prices of goods and services bought in transactions will influence the willingness to hold money to conduct those transactions. A higher price level means a greater need for liquidity to buy the same amount of goods and services. So high price levels means higher money demand. And you can think about if the prices are doubled overnight, you're going to need twice as much cash the next day to buy the same goods and services that you normally bought before. The third thing that influences demand for money is income. Greater income implies more goods and services can be bought, so that more money is needed to conduct transactions. A higher real national income, or GNP, means more goods and services are being produced and bought in transactions, increasing the need for liquidity. So higher national income will lead to higher money demand. Next, we're going to think about the model of aggregate money demand. Aggregate money demand can be expressed by MD equals P times L, which is a function of R and Y. And that's where P is the price level in the economy, Y is real national income, R is a measure of the interest rate, and L is the aggregate real money demand, which is a function of interest rates and real national income. Alternatively, we can rewrite this in real terms. So MD divided by P is equal to L, which is a function of R and Y. Aggregate real money demand, again, is a function of national income and interest rates. So now we're going to graphically look at what happens to real money demand when there's changes in interest rates and national income. We just talked about the interest rate is the price of money. Represents the opportunity cost of holding cash. So at high interest rates, we expect that aggregate real money demand will be lower. So let's suppose that we start at an interest rate of R1. At this interest rate, the economy has demands the quantity L1 of cash. If the interest rate increases to R2, we should expect our demand for liquidity to decrease, in which it does to L2. Now let's see what happens when there's a change in national income. So we said earlier, if there's an increase in the national income, this means that there's more goods and services to be bought and sold in the market. Therefore, there's going to be an increased demand for liquidity. So at every price or every interest rate, we should see an increased quantity demanded. That's going to be represented by a shift to the right of the real aggregate money demand curve. So let's suppose we have an initial interest rate of R and an initial quantity demanded of money of L1. When there's the increase in national income at the same interest rate, we'll see a greater demand or quantity demanded of money at L2. Now let's add the second half of the market to this graph. So the money market uses both aggregate money demand and aggregate money supply. The condition for equilibrium in the money market is when money supply is equal to money demand. Alternatively, we can define the equilibrium using the supply of real money and the demand for real money by dividing both sides of the equation by the price level. So in this case, we get real money supply is equal to real aggregate money demand, which again is a function of interest rates and national income. This equilibrium condition will yield an equilibrium interest rate for the economy. So let's go ahead and look at this money market graphically. So as before, we have the negatively sloped money real aggregate money demand curve, L. And this time we've added the real money supply curve, which is vertical. And the reason why this is vertical is because it is controlled by the central bank and is not directly influenced by the interest rate. The equilibrium condition says that we have an equilibrium interest rate where real money supply and real money demand are equal or at the intersection. So the equilibrium interest rate in this particular economy is R. Now what happens to the equilibrium interest rate when there's changes in the money supply? So we're going to start with the previous picture. Now let's suppose that the central bank decides to change the money supply through open market operations. Just as a review, if the central bank sells government bonds, the money supply will contract. If the central bank buys back those bonds, the money supply will increase. In this particular example, I want the money supply to increase. Therefore, we would expect the central bank would start buying bonds in order to increase the money supply. So how would an increase in the money supply be represented in this graph? It would be represented by a right shift of the real money supply curve. And given the new real money supply curve, there's a new intersection between it and the real money demand curve, and we see the interest rate go down. Just to think about this intuitively, if the central bank increases the amount of money in circulation, anytime that you increase the quantity of a good, the price of that good will go down. And remember, the interest rate is like the price of money. So as the central bank increases the amount of money available in the market, we'll see the price of money or the interest rate decrease. Sorry about that. Now let's think about changes in national income. So again, we're going to start out with the same initial graph that we had before. Now, as before, we said that national income, when it increases, is going to increase the demand for money at every interest rate. So it's going to be represented by a rightward shift of the real aggregate money demand curve. Initially, there's going to be an excess demand for money because the interest rate, the real money supply hasn't changed, so and the interest rate hasn't had time to adjust yet. But as in any market, of course, with more demand for money, that's going to put upward price pressure on that good, or in this case, it's going to put upward price pressure on the currency, which is the interest rate. So we'll see the interest rate will increase to R2. And this concludes the first part of the lecture for Chapter 15.